Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of RSP Podcast with me, Rajan Palmer. And this episode is an introduction into the podcast and what the type of content we will be featuring, the type of people we aim to attract, and just a little bit about myself. So, I'm 22 years old. I'm a history graduate from Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge, and I am currently finishing up a master's degree at the University of Sussex in journalism and documentary practice. And the reason I wanted to set up this podcast is because I think podcasts are I think this is a really good way of talking, interacting, and discussing opinions much quicker than can be done in video and documentary, which I am also doing and also aim to succeed in and aim to get further in. But with podcasts, I can talk through issues in much quicker ways, and I'm able to discuss these issues, and also it's easier to get people on. It's easier to have people on, talk through these issues which are important. And as this podcast, although it does focus on travel, I myself have a wide variety of interests. I enjoy everything related to travel, and that includes the bad side. It includes the war, it includes the politics, it includes the crime, it includes poaching, but it also includes the positives. It includes humbling hospitality, stories of friendship and kindness. But like I said, I want to discuss all manner of things on this podcast. I want to discuss conservation, crime. I'm hoping to get a couple of journalists on to talk about the Mexican cartels and the effect it's having over there and the effect it will have on the tourism industry. I am in the process. A future episode will be coming out on conservation from a wildlife photographer who will be talking to me about his adventures in Africa and what can be done to save some of the incredible species there. But this episode is also it's also an open invitation to anyone who has any topic that they feel that they need to discuss, that they want people to engage in, because that's what I want as well. So you can contact me on my Instagram, which is Rajan_Palmer, RAJJAN_PARMAR, or on this podcast's Instagram page, which is RSP_podcast. And there will be contact details there for anyone who feels that they have any topics to discuss or that they want to discuss. So, as going on a bit more about myself, I am a massive traveller myself. I'm 22. I've travelled to over 40 countries, including across Asia, some parts of Africa, North America, Europe. Most recently, I undertook a 3-month journey across the Middle East. That happened last year, nearly coming up to a year ago, actually. And this, as I said, this is an introduction to the podcast, to myself, and this just a little bit to how the structure is going to go on these podcasts. So, if you are watching on YouTube, then some pictures will be coming up on the screen momentarily. These will be some of my own pictures from my personal travels, but they will also be, in future episodes, they will be from other people's experiences. And I'm trying to ask people to send in their photos to get a bit more of a gauge of more personal memories, because as a photographer myself, I think that there's a lot of personality behind a photograph. And if you aren't watching on YouTube, if you are listening via another means, Spotify or Apple Music, then these pictures will also be posted on my Instagram page, RSP_podcast. So without further ado, I will go on, and now I'll be just showing some photos and stories from the Middle East, some of my own stories, pictures that mean a lot to me over the past the 3 months that I spent out there. So I traveled through Israel. I started off in the holy city of Jerusalem. I traveled through Israel, Palestine, Egypt, Oman, Turkey. The reason I went on this journey through the Middle East is this region it's always fascinated me. It's this kind of the birthplace of the world we live in today. It's the home of the three what we call Abrahamic religions: Christianity, Judaism, Islam. It has, I mean, there's almost no one on the planet who's never heard of the city of Jerusalem. It has very rich history, rich culture, and so I started off there. And as I say, I went through Palestine, Egypt, Oman, and Turkey. It took me 3 months. And the first picture, which should be coming up on your screen now, is a picture of me outside the Dome of the Rock Mosque in Jerusalem. I'll be sharing a photo from every country I went to, just one, because I could never pack in all the great experiences and times I had in just a short podcast. But the first picture is me outside of the Dome of the Rock Mosque in Jerusalem. This is a very special place. It has a special place in world history, in a lot of people's lives, and it's the center of the Israel-Palestine conflict as well. It's, according to various sacred texts, it's the place where Abraham offered his son Isaac to God as a sacrifice, as God was testing Abraham. This story appears in Islam, in Christianity, in Judaism. This is a very famous story that all of these religions share, and it's, as I said, it's the center of the Israel-Palestine conflict, because the Temple Mount, the platform on which this mosque currently stands, is forbidden to enter for any Jewish citizen. But it is a sacred place to Muslims. People who live in Palestine, on the other side of the war, they live on what is officially called the Palestinian territories. Although this is the third holiest site in Islam, they don't have the opportunity to visit it. And the reason I chose this picture is because even though I'm not of Muslim faith, I'm not of any faith, I got the opportunity to visit it. I have a story of I tried to sneak in. I tried to sneak into this mosque because of my complexion, and I told the guards that my name was Muhammad Khan Ali, that I was from Pakistan, and I was trying to get away with it, but they didn't take it, and I was actually followed home by a police officer or someone with a very big gun. But as I going back, and is that I had the privilege to visit this site just from the outside anyway, and it's a very amazing building. It's these vibrant blue and green colours, and this photo was taken 3 days into my journey into Jerusalem. It was only 3 days into a 3-month journey, and it was one of the sites I was most excited to see as well, because of its part in the society I grew up in. Because even though I was not raised Christian myself, a lot of the schools I went to, I had to sing Christian songs, and there was various there was a lot of Christianity mixed into the school. So it was quite interesting for me to go there and to experience it for myself. And I could go on for a long time about the Israel-Palestine conflict. I spent 3 weeks over in Israel-Palestine, 3.5 weeks. About 3 weeks of those living in a rooftop in Jerusalem, and another with a family in a hostel in Bethlehem. And I have very special memories of Israel and Palestine and the Holy Land, and some very happy memories. I met some very, very great friends who I still keep in contact with now. But I also saw some some very heartbreaking things in places like Hebron, where there are more soldiers than civilians. There's a lot of heartbreaking stories of children being hit with rubber bullets and bottles of human excrement thrown on the Palestinian people as they walk through the street. And there's, as I say, there's a lot of heartbreaking stories which do come out of Israel and Palestine. But and I also did get a bit of negative backlash going there, saying, why would you go to Israel? It's a terrorist state. And although I have my own opinions on Israel as well, I always believe the most important thing about travel is going and seeing places where people don't usually see and don't, and you get an opinion which doesn't come from the news. It comes from your own experiences, what you've seen with your own eyes, and I think that's the most important thing, particularly when visiting a place as complex as the Middle East, which is diverse with cultures, and even the Arabic language is diverse. I mean, I must have come across 5 or 6 different dialects in the 3 or 4 countries I went to. It's just such a complex region, and I think this is important to understand in the Middle East. But this mosque, although it's the center of conflict, is very beautiful, and there's something very special about it. And I was volunteering at a hostel in Jerusalem, Citadel Youth Hostel, and I was sleeping on the rooftop there because it was hot in Jerusalem, but it was also nice to sleep on the rooftop, and I could see this from my mattress and my bed. And the prayer calls would wake me up at 3 a.m. every single day. Every single morning. They would wake me up at 3 a.m, blasting out across the city. And there was something quite magical about it after a while. At first, when I was tired and I just really wanted to go to bed, it was so frustrating. But there was something really special about it, and I would look at it for a long time, almost every day from my bed, because it's just such a spectacular building, and it's such a spectacular place. As I said, so I spent 3 weeks in Israel and Palestine, and moving on to the next picture. This is a sunrise over the Red Sea. On the mountains on the other side are the mountains of Saudi Arabia, which a country I did want to visit in during my journey through the Middle East, but unfortunately, due to unknown reasons, the visa wasn't accepted, and I don't think they were actually accepting tourists at that time. So I wasn't able to get a visa, but the reason I chose this picture is because I was about a month into my journey at this point. This picture was taken from Sinai in Egypt, a region which, again, I'd heard a lot of bad things about. I'd heard there were Islamic insurgents hiding in the mountains. The Islamic State and the Egyptian military were battling out in the mountains. There was also rogue Bedouin tribes who didn't take too kindly to foreigners. But Sinai is one of my favorite places in the world. When I got there, although it was scary, I was on the road there, and there was nothing more than abandoned hotels and military checkpoints. Once I got to Dahab, a little beach town that just sticks out of the mountains, I just found it was just an incredible place. It just felt like something out of the 70s with just really cheap beer and a lot of young, vibrant, full of life Egyptian people who really shaked my previous knowledge on how Egyptian people would be. I'd heard that Egyptian people were just looking for money, that they don't really like foreigners, that they were just looking for money. And I found the complete opposite in Sinai and in the rest of Egypt when I later traveled through the country. The Egyptian people are just incredibly friendly. They're so nice and they're hospitable. Dahab will always have a very, very special place with me. But the reason I chose this photo was because it was actually on this night. It was a month into traveling. I was in Egypt, and I was actually feeling a little bit homesick. But for about an hour or two, and I think every traveler probably gets that for a little bit. But I decided, and a couple of my friends were saying that they wanted to stay up for the sunrise, and I wasn't that dedicated, but I was like, if I'm awake, I'll come and I'll join you guys. And I actually stayed up the whole night drinking, and me and this other Egyptian guy, we stayed up the whole night drinking, and all of my other friends who wanted to go for the sunrise, they'd fallen asleep. But I decided to stay up the whole night. I decided to stay up, and me and him, we were ready, and we were drinking, and we were ready to go. And we woke up my friends, and we went and we watched this sunrise. And I remember thinking, if I can't get to Saudi Arabia, this is the damn best I'll ever get, because it was amazing. And I'm more of a sunset person. I'm someone who prefers being there as it goes dark rather than it going light. But to stay up for this sunrise, watching it rise over the holy kingdom of Saudi Arabia, it was something special, and it was something that will stay with me for a long time, because it was also a few days before I left some of my traveling companions as well. So I'll always really enjoy that memory. And Egypt, as I said, in Sinai there was a lot of abandoned hotels, there was a lot of military checkpoints, but I'm sure there's many people, I mean, in my lifetime, I remember growing up when I was young that a lot of people would go to Egypt on holiday. A lot of people, it was quite a popular tourist destination, but the revolution happened in 2011 and people stopped going, and the tourists haven't come back, and that's a real problem for Egyptian people, because a lot of their industry thrived on tourism, and you can see it when you're in Egypt. Especially in Cairo, and in Luxor especially, actually, they really need the tourists to come back, and you have people almost crying at you saying, please, we're not terrorists, we need people to come back, we need the tourists, look, it's safe here. And it is to an extent, but security comes with stability, and I think the bringing in of tourist money will do that for Egypt, and I hope it will do that for Egypt, and it will reboost their economy. From Sinai, I travelled onto my third country in this journey, which was a country I'd actually already been to before. I travelled by ferry to Jordan, and Jordan is one of my favourite countries. It was my first experience of the Middle East, actually. Before I'd set out on this 3-month journey earlier last year in 2019, I road tripped Jordan with a couple of my friends over 7 days, and I just loved it. Everything about the place was amazing. The first time I did it, we road tripped from Aqaba in the south to Amman in the north, and we started at Wadi Rum Desert, Petra, and the Dead Sea, and Amman, and it was great. It was amazing. I would really recommend getting a car if you go to Jordan. It adds another layer to it. But this time round, when I was hitchhiking, so to speak, I was hitchhiking some ways and getting local buses in other ways. But this time round, I arrived again at the ferry port in Jordan, and I re-met my friend who I'd met previously in Jordan, and it was really nice to see him. It was nice to have a local to come meet you. in their hometown, in their home city, and it was nice to see him again as well, because some of the friends you meet traveling, you're not sure if you will ever get to see them again. So it was nice to see them so close after such a long time. And I spent a couple of days there in Aqaba with him. And a traveling tip for those going to Aqaba is that if you travel in Aqaba, if you travel into Jordan via Aqaba, you don't have to pay the £40 visa tax, which you will have to pay if you arrive in Amman. It's a tax-free zone, which also means that you get all of the cheapest booze in the Middle East out there. Apparently, all the people from Saudi Arabia, which is only 20 miles down the road, they just hop the border and get all their alcohol there, and they just stay the night there drinking. That's what I heard. I'm not sure how true that is, but that's what I heard. But the picture I chose is me standing on top of this mountain in Wadi Rum Desert in Jordan, where I'd volunteered for 2 weeks. And this is really out in the desert. It's about, I would say, probably when you arrive at Wadi Rum, you arrive at Wadi Rum village and you park your car or you get out of your bus or whatever. And then a Bedouin guide comes and picks you up and drives you to their camp in the desert somewhere, wherever that would be. But they're usually all within a 20-minute vicinity. Where we were staying, these were with proper Bedouin tribes who didn't own a hotel or anything. They just lived as much as they could in the way their ancestors did, herding goats, living off goat milk and goat fat and goat meat, and fighting off wolves with their rifles and making sure that the wolves don't kill their livestock. Really deep out in the desert, maybe about an hour and a half drive away from Wadi Rum village. I got this opportunity to stay with these Bedouin because I was volunteering at a Bedouin camp. They were running a hotel in a way, and I say they were running it. It kind of ended up me running it, doing all of their emails and their account, and sorting out their accounts and their bookings. And I basically realized that I was doing their job for them and I wasn't getting paid. The only thing I would get would be a mattress out in the desert, sleeping wild out in the desert under the night sky, which was a pretty good payment, I have to admit, but it wasn't what I'd gone for. I'd gone to experience Bedouin culture. And so I spoke to this, I can only describe him as this sort of shadowy figure called Daniel, who I believe was in Argentina. I was speaking to him via email. And I told him that me and someone I was staying with, that I wasn't really enjoying what I was doing staying with them, and I was thinking of going because it wasn't what I signed up for. I signed up for getting proper Bedouin culture, and I decided to stick it out for a little bit. I decided to stay, but they'd actually heard me heard me and the guy I was staying with complaining. And their attitude towards us completely changed. They started roaming around with their guns out more. They would, one of the main guy, I think his name was Shaka, he would clean his M16 assault rifle in front of me almost every day. I'm not sure if he was intimidating or just, maybe he wanted to show off his toys. But it was, so I'd been pretty worried that I'd pissed off these guys with guns, and they said to me basically that they're going to take me out into the desert, and I'm going to go stay with his uncle who lives really deep far in the desert. And I remember thinking and saying to the guy I was staying with, like we've pissed these guys off here, and they've got guns, and they've just said they're going to take us deep out into the desert. So, as you can imagine, I was a little bit nervous, but I kept my cool, and I ended up having a fantastic experience out with real Bedouin tribes deep in the mountains. and this picture was taken up one of the mountains that I climbed. Me and the guy I was staying with spent about 2 hours climbing up here, another English guy. And when we got back to the camp, one of the Bedouins said to us, he was like, I saw you up there, and you shouldn't go up there. Don't go up there at all. And we were like, why? He was like, it's really dangerous. You can die. There are wolves up there. No foreigners ever climbed that mountain. I thought that was pretty cool, to be honest. I was quite happy to claim that as my own. And this is me up that mountain as apparently the first foreigner to ever climb up there. So maybe now I've just got to think of a name for it. The third picture is in the Gulf nation of Oman. And this picture is actually one of my favourite photos I've ever taken. I'm really big into photography. It's a massive hobby and passion of mine. I love to take photos of the people and the places that I go to. I really thoroughly enjoy it. I think a lot can be said from a photograph. This picture was just taken on the side of the road in Oman. I was just driving. I think I was just in a car I was just in a taxi, and I was just driving, and there's just I just remember thinking, why are there so many camels all over the road? I still don't know to this day. Just everywhere, just camels everywhere. You got to stop every 5-10 minutes because there's a camel crossing. It's really strange, but Oman is a really, really cool nation. Really expensive. I come from the UK, and a one Omani rial is at the time was £2.12. So even if a meal was £2, it's about £4, which is quite expensive. Especially, I mean, even in the Middle East, like Israel is fairly expensive and Jordan is fairly expensive, but Oman was on another level. But I was driving in this car, and I was just at the side of the road, and I saw these camels just standing there at the side of the road, and I thought they looked really majestic, so I just took their picture. And it just turns out to be one of my favorites. I'm not sure why. I just think, especially the camel standing on the hill, he just looks really, really majestic, really proud. It's I would always recommend Oman to any travelers, but if you do it, I would recommend you rent a car, because hostels are expensive and hostels are thin on the ground. There's not much of a tourist infrastructure in Oman, but it's worth checking out, and especially now when it's still quite rugged, it's still quite untouched. Some beautiful valleys and mountains in the west, in the Dhofar region, on the border with Yemen, where I found myself hitchhiking in August of last year, or in August of 2019. Really friendly people who will be happy to pick you up and just talk to you, and they just really want to get to know you. And if you are hitchhiking, you won't have to wait longer than 45 minutes for a lift, because everyone is so friendly, and they just really want to get to know you. And the final picture is taken in the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul. For me, Istanbul is a city I've always wanted to go to. It was a really, really big goal of mine to go to Istanbul. But when I booked this trip, I hadn't actually booked a ticket home. The final ticket I'd booked was to Istanbul from Muscat. I actually ended up stopping off in Hungary to visit one of my really good friends before I flew home. But Istanbul was, for me, it was always going to be the final finishing point in my journey in the Middle East. And I'd always had this idea that I was going to walk from Asia into Europe. For those of you who don't know, that Istanbul is a transcontinental city. Some of it sits in Europe and some of it sits in Asia. And obviously I'd been in the Middle East for the past 3 months. I'd been in Asia, and I'd always had it in my mind ever since I'd started out on this journey that I was going to cross the bridge over the Golden Horn into Europe. But when I landed in Istanbul, I'd been on a long flight with a baby crying and kicking my chair behind me. I was exhausted, and I thought, I just don't care now. I thought, I just don't care. I wasn't feeling well. I was sick. I thought, I just don't care. I'm just going to get on a bus, get to the city, and get a taxi to my hostel. I just don't care. And I remember getting on the bus, and I was walking there thinking, I just can't wait to get in the hostel. And I got off the bus. There's a big bus into Istanbul, which is a massive city. And like I say, I arrived on the Asian side in the airport, and that's about 2 hours away from the city anyway. About 2 hours away from, at least 2 hours away from the European side, where my hostel was. And I got off the bus. I decided to have a coffee, and I went to go get a smaller public transport bus to my hostel. And I remember the bus, I jumped on the bus, paid the full fee to get to my hostel, which was only €3 or so, 3 lira or something, 3 lira. And I remember the bus stopped at a stop just before the bridge that walked that went into Europe. And I thought, it was going to take me another 45 minutes, an hour, but there's no way I can miss this opportunity. So I jumped off the bus and I walked back into Europe after 3 months of being out on the road in the Middle East. And that was one of my favorite experiences from traveling, because it was, even though for me it felt like the end, it was still a big part of the journey, if not the biggest part of that journey, being in Istanbul, knowing that I'd completed a goal which I'd set 3 months prior, I suppose I'd booked it 6 months prior. It was a goal that I'd had for half a year, something that I was really nervous to do, but I was still excited to do, and it was a really, really special moment for me, especially walking through that historic Grand Bazaar, which is one of the most famous sites in Istanbul. And the reason I just chose this picture is just because it's such a stunning building. It's a stunning place with amazing smells, food, sights. I can only recommend visiting Istanbul, and especially spending time in the Grand Bazaar. And after that, I flew home. I flew to Hungary, actually, to visit my friend, and I flew home. That's just a small story about me and some of my adventures, but it's also just an introduction into the podcast, into the way that it will be structured, into the type of things I would like to talk about, the type of content I would like to cover. I think this is the end of episode 1. If you enjoyed it, please like and send me a message, get in contact if you have something you want to talk about, whether it's conservation, crime, poverty, even just conspiracy theories. I would love to hear people's opinions on everything and anything. Thank you for listening. Check out my Instagram, Rajan_Palmer, or RSP Podcast. And next week's episode will be featuring the man in the blue blazer, Stuart Nelson, who, since retiring in 2015, has aimed to walk 3,000 kilometers every year. A really inspirational traveler. He's walked 8 of Spain's Caminos. I actually met him on a hostel rooftop in Jerusalem, the one I mentioned earlier. After that, I'll have a conversation with C.R. Strang, a good friend of mine, a fellow blogger and podcaster. We'll be talking about his experience first time backpacking in Europe, and we'll also be talking about the struggles which Europe has faced in the past, including its most recent 20th century history, including the Nazis, and we also talk about our predictions for what will happen to Europe. Really interesting podcast there. If you want to tune in, that will be coming in 2 weeks. The next one will be with Michael Mark, a man who walked from Estonia to Indonesia, a journey which took over 4 years and 22 countries. Another really, really inspirational traveler. He did it all on foot, wild camping. Really crazy guy, really, really exciting podcast, and it was great fun to chat with him. So look forward to that in the next few weeks. As I say, follow me on social media. I would really like to hear people's comments and thoughts below. Thank you very much. This has been Rajan Palmer with RSP Podcast.